Welcome to American Issues Take One. I'm Tim Apicella, your host. Today's title is Trump's Criminal Indictments. He leads the GOP. We're going to talk about the recent CNN poll that was taken between or cover the period of June 13th to the 17th. And we're going to go into the details of that and what it all means. And before we do that, though, I'd like to introduce my co-host, Jay Fidell, and our special esteemed guest, Chuck Crumpton. Welcome back, Chuck. We've missed you. I'm going to go over some of the stats on that CNN poll. Primarily, it's Trump in the lead. He now has 47% favorability versus May of 53%. That's down 6%, so that is remarkable. DeSantis is 26. In May, it was 26. Pence is up a little bit, 9%. In May, it was 6%. Haley's up 5%, or excuse me, down 1% because she's at 5. In May, she was at 6%. Scott is at 4%. In May, he was at 2%. And last but not least, Chris Christie's at 3%. And in May, he was at 2%. So Trump is enjoying a sizable lead. And the topic of this show is, yeah, he's in the lead, but guess what? Why? Why after 2 criminal indictments, 2 impeachments, a whole list of things that he's done before he became president, as he was president, and now after he's president, to include January 6th, why is he in the lead with these GOP? Are they MAGA GOP or are they more than MAGA GOP that are favoring him? Tough question to you, Jay.
Yeah, it's about Bonnie and Clyde, Tim. What we have here is the American appetite for the rogue hero, and he's made himself into a rogue hero. I mean, you can argue with those polls individually. I personally question what CNN does these days. I wouldn't be the only one, and I question their polls. But taken together, the polls indicate that Trump has gained support by virtue of the indictment against his criminal activity. And I think it's the American flaw. Maybe it's a flaw in the species in general. When the crowd helped Bonnie and Clyde, and there were mobsters too in the 30s that the crowd supported. It was the romance of crime, and somehow he has tapped into that. So he gets more money and he gets more support as a result of the indictment. And let me make a wild guess and say when he's indicted again and again, the same thing will happen, and he will be the GOP candidate, and he'll have a pretty good run at being president, unless he actually goes to jail. But that's not likely.
Well, let's go back in history, Jay, for a second. You know, we had the Joseph McCarthy witch hunt trials for seeking a communist behind every door and behind every rock. What was the flavor, the psychological flavor of the country then? Certainly wasn't a Bonnie and Clyde issue, but yet this senator from, I think it was Minnesota, had the country captured for years in an environment of fear and fear that they were going to be called out as a communist. How is that different, or how is that the same as we now see under Donald Trump and his ability to control a wide swath of populations here in this country?
You're right. I mean, that was different. And you have to distinguish that from Bonnie and Clyde. But in a way, there's a familiarity. It's kind of a madness. It's kind of a collective madness that anyone would support a guy like McCarthy. And he was able to, achieve a certain amount of support in Congress mostly, but also among the right, who didn't like communists and all. I guess the problem is that people are suggestible. They are suggestible in this country. And if you get the right leader, a Huey Long in Louisiana, for example, or a Jim Jones in Guyana, you will find that people will follow a negative leader. And I guess you could find that anywhere. You could certainly find that in Europe in the 20th century. So it is a failure, a sociological failure of nations and societies, that negative leaders come up and tap into this very negative stuff in the way human beings are constructed. And in that case, too, in McCarthy, too, that's what he was playing to.
Hey, Chuck, going down memory lane with Donald Trump, a lot of the GOP involved those in the military. Yet, if I recall the past, right out of the beginning of his candidacy in 2016, Donald Trump referred to John McCain as not a hero because he was captured. That was offensive to a lot of folks in the military. Then, as president, I believe it was during the D-Day memorial acknowledgement every year we have, that he referred to the dead of World War I in France as suckers and losers. He's disrespected all sorts of Gold Star families in the past. Yet the military personnel seem to still like him after all these horrible insults. How is that possible? To the second part of the question is, how is he possible to retain these kind of numbers when he's done all sorts of horrible things, including impeachments, now criminal indictments? Chuck, what's your guess? Jay thinks it's a Bonnie and Clyde situation. What's your best guess?
I think it is what it's been for a long time, and which Trump seized on and has turned to his advantage. It's still a whites versus the other. It's still a racist, fear-based strategy and mindset. And it's really well documented, data supported, and set out in an exceptional book called The Sum of Us by Heather McGhee, last name spelled M-C-G-H-E-E, former head of Demos, which is Greek for people, the root word of democracy. And it's a really wonderful exposition of the causal role of racism, fear-based racism, replacement-based racism, zero-sum-based racism in all of this combination of inequalities and injustices in all sectors of society, in redlining and housing, in admissions and education, in job discrimination. People forget the FHA in its early years specifically in writing excluded non-whites from mortgage funding and financing. The same was true in schools. If public schools were integrated, whites set up private schools, funneled their kids, and maintained segregation. So fear-based segregation and fear-based stereotyping and bias have continued to be the root. Trump has seized on that. He's the epitome of fear-based racism.
I think in Charlottesville, he clearly delineated where he stood by stating that the white supremacist groups that were marching, that there were quote unquote good people on both sides. I think that wasn't a dog whistle, that was a blowhorn. And quite frankly, and a lot of people took to it. I always thought that MAGA, Make America Great Again, really was a call to make America white again. And I'm not saying white as far as population, but certainly as far as power and control. And I think that appeals to a lot of folks. But they won't admit that, will they, Chuck? They won't admit it, that's secretly why they support Donald Trump, despite all the horrific, horrible, deplorable things he says and does. They'll never admit to that. Is that something you agree to, or what's your take on that?
Basically true. You've got the ultimate hypocritical divide between the verbal platitudes of, yeah, we don't see color, we don't see race, we don't discriminate, and the actual practice in which, as Heather McGhee documents in her books, whites, even young, purportedly progressive whites, will react more negatively to neighborhoods with Black presences than to white dominant neighborhoods. They're going to choose pathways in their lives and in their relations and in their affiliations that reinforce white exclusionary fear-based power. Mm-hmm. Certainly, you can talk about the elitists, but the impact, as author McGee points out, is on all sectors, including white and including especially poor white. It's not just Blacks that suffered in Flint, Michigan, or in Richmond, California, or in other areas where industrial waste was specifically intentionally unloaded onto poorer, largely Black and Latinx communities. Continues to be the case.
Let me jump in on that to say that I don't disagree with anything you've said. We live in a country of racism. The Civil War is not over. It's being fought again. And we've established that through, observing the history of the Trump administration and the way that he's brought this out. Where I get troubled is in the title of the show. We have indictments on our hands. And we all know this a racist country. I wouldn't disagree with anything you said, Chuck. And with the McGee book, absolutely. But these people, aside from being, supportive of Trump's racism, are willing to agree with him that it's a witch hunt when he gets indicted. Are willing to, at some level of their consciousness, they know that he is guilty, as we all do. And yet they call it a witch hunt, and they agree with him when he whines about it. So it's very troubling. So it goes beyond, I think, the racism. Is they're willing to throw the whole society up for the racism. They're willing to deny the fact that, the Department of Justice has good and valid evidence against him. And indeed, we'll see more indictments. My guess, my fingers are crossed, we'll see more indictments and the same reaction. It's beyond the racism. The racism has gone to the point where people don't care about the country.
Well, if the source of Donald Trump's support is based in racism, and I agree with that. I think there's a lot of just people want to get back to the good old days, and that meant they were in power on everything. But if all roads lead to racism and the support for Donald Trump, why is it that no one is able to call that specific point out? Because are they worried that they're going to offend the followers of Donald Trump, particularly the media? Where's the media on this? If it is that blatant of racism is the cause of Donald Trump's existence and continued existence, and it's the cause of the support for Donald Trump, why is the media pussyfooting around and not calling that specific thing out?
Well, I think the media has largely failed. I mean, it goes back to Ann Applebaum's article in, I think it was The Atlantic, back a couple of years ago, where she pointed out that the communists took over Eastern Europe by making everybody afraid. And so they would succumb to the communist line, and they wouldn't say anything. Nobody calls it out. And in fact, here on Think Tech, on your show, Tim, we call it out. But in general, the media doesn't call it out, doesn't, call the shots the way they see them. And, I'm concerned about that. I'm also concerned about the fact that we haven't really figured out why this group of 60 million people would deny the reality, would deny the insurrection, would deny the election, and now would deny the indictments.
Okay, well, let's go to that. We're going to see a commentary probably after this show, and the commentary based out of some Thomas Friedman articles in the New York Times, and it suggests that there is fear to call him out. What are they scared of? Are they scared of Donald Trump and what he can do to them? Why is there such a high level of fear to call Donald Trump out? Chris Christie doesn't give a damn. He's doing it. But why are others fearful, and what are they really afraid of? What is Donald Trump going to do to them if they do call him out?
Well, probably nothing directly. I mean, he doesn't know them, but he has a kind of wolf whistle organization out there where he speaks coded language to people who would do his bidding, and you don't know who they are, and you don't know what they would do, and you don't know whether they are watching you. And it wouldn't be him; it would be them. It would be some of the violence that he provokes. So when you have a divided country and you have a negative leader like this, a super negative, autocratic leaning leader like this, who calls for violence, you could wind up being a target because of his coded language. That's one thing. And the other thing is that people in government is not exactly the same. They're afraid to lose their jobs. They're afraid to lose their power. And they don't want to do that. They're in government to support him. They were appointed and recruited to support him. The first thing that happens is you get drawn into government with a job. This is especially important if you can't get a job elsewhere. And you're not as strong morally, perhaps, as you might be, and you were recruited for that reason. And now you're up against him, where he says, and his friends and acolytes say, "You're not my people, and I'm going to get rid of you. I'm going to punish you." So, I feel that fear is at two levels. One is at the level of the divide in the country, and that's kind of vague, but there it is. It's there. And the other, especially with the guns involved, don't forget the guns. And then also in government, where people are below the standard we might expect, and they cotton to him, and they are afraid of losing their jobs or power.
Okay, thanks, Jay. Chuck, this is an important concept because Donald Trump enjoys, no matter what he says or does, he enjoys being the leader of the GOP party. And I've never been able to figure that out for 5 years, how that continues, but I think we're onto something here. So do you agree with Thomas Friedman's suggestion that, as Jay just pointed out, that there is a fear factor that prohibits or prevents people from calling Donald Trump out on his words or his behavior?
Yeah, let me add one point that I think you have to insinuate to finish that question. And that is, if what Friedman is saying is, if you call them out, if you call these people out, they couldn't get away with what they have been doing. So you can stop the autocracy, the move to autocracy. You can stop the move to madness if you call them out. But the media, as you said, Tim, and in general, the society these days, because of intimidation, doesn't call them out and therefore doesn't stop them from doing this.
Yeah, I think in response to your question, Tim, that we go back to not why the media isn't calling him out. Who is the media? Rupert Murdoch, a right-wing white male billionaire who runs Fox News, who runs Wall Street Journal, and even what has been, I think, mistakenly called liberal media, New York Times, Washington Post, is still far from an understanding and accurate, truthful, complete, comprehensive reflection of reality in all situations. I don't think the fear is fear of Trump or his minions doing things to people. I think it's fear of the people that Trump vilifies and therefore alliance with him and under him to protect them against those people. In 2 or 3 more decades, the United States will not be a white majority country anymore. There are a lot of people who are extremely fearful of that. Trump has rounded them up at a level that even Joe McCarthy hadn't before that. And I think the fear of those people and that shift of power, of privilege, of rights, of interest is very much at the root of the alliance to Trump. They don't care if he commits crimes. Cowboys, whether it was Hopalong or Roy or whoever it was, or Clint, it could shoot anybody of color they wanted to, and people would cheer.
Go to kind of that point. I recall distinctly when John McCain lost severely to Barack Obama, that the GOP did what is called an election autopsy to figure out what happened and why it happened. Well, part of that was Sarah Palin was identified, but a bigger part was, just as you suggested, the demographics of the country is changing. And if the GOP wants to continue to be, competitive with the Democrats and win elections, they're going to have to open the tent and be a big tent party. It seems to me that they've gone in 180 degrees from that recommendation, that close the tent tighter and be more restrictive and more selective on who they want to see as GOP and their policies towards minorities and things of that nature. So what happened? it seemed reasonable that if you want to get more voters, you open the tent and allow them in and integrate those voters. What do you think happened there?
How many popular vote elections have the GOP presidential candidates won in the last 20 years? Few of them, a small minority of them. Trump has never won a popular majority. Obama won 2, Clinton won 2. Bush, in one of his 2 terms, did not win a popular majority. That's 6 out of the last 8 to 10 elections. What they did get is, if you can't win by winning votes, by winning popular votes, change the rules, cheat, shrink the tent in the electoral process, in access to voting, in the management of the voting, and in the electoral college results after the voting. And if you lose all 3 of those, cheat, come in and say, hey, it was rigged, we really won, so we're going to stay.
Hey, Jay, for the last 5 or 6 years, you and I and guests have opined about Trump, and we predicted the cracks are starting to form. Donald Trump, soon enough will not be considered by anyone as relevant. Yet here we are 6 years later, after several failed predictions, here he is. So let me just go down to a number on the CNN poll is that in May, Donald Trump from the GOP received a 77% favorability. Now it's 67%. Unfavorability in May was 18%. Today it's 27%. Cracks in the facade for Donald Trump because of these criminal indictments. Is that the causal connection between the lower ratings?
Hard to deny that. It's got to be that. That's what's happening. That's where the national attention is focused on these indictments. The question is whether it's a question of degree. It's whether it's enough to really shake up the base. And I'm not sure that it is.
Does it help that we have Asa Hutchinson and Chris Christie not really caring what they say about Donald Trump? They're just going to say it. They're going to call out the obvious. And they're not concerned about winning the election, but they're concerned, as they state, to preserve the rule of law and democracy. Will others join Asa Hutchinson and Chris Christie in that effort?
Maybe so, and good for them. But, it doesn't really wrap around what we've been talking about, that the country has moved to racism and fear and a willingness to throw the whole apple cart over and lie. I'm not sure they're going to prevail, even if they're seeking to return to the rule of law, a constitutional democracy. We may have crossed the Rubicon on that. There are a lot of people, they don't even know what those things mean, and they have no idea what's going to happen to them if this phenomenon continues. Yes, it's nice to hear from them. We cheer them on. But can they win the Republican nomination? Can they win a national election? Talking about the rule of law, that sounds more like the Democratic position than any Republican position. We may be too far down the road.
Let's fast forward. Let's put on our fantasy predictive hats. What if Donald Trump is convicted? I mean, he was convicted in a civil court for sexual assault against E. Jean Carroll. That didn't seem to impact his numbers whatsoever. Let's say either through the D.A. Bragg's case or the document case from Jack Smith. What if there's a conviction? How does that, or does that change the direction of Donald Trump for his candidacy in 2024?
To her credit, I guess it's her, it's Eileen Cannon has presumptively set the trial here. And if there's a trial soon, then Smith prevails, then there'll be a conviction soon. Now we have that conviction right in the middle of the road. I think that will draw off more MAGA people. It will make them question him. But whether it goes the whole distance, I don't know, because he could still shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue and get away with it. The Bonnie and Clyde thing is still in play. And it may be that they see him as a hero for doing what he did. And I'm not sure what happens there. However, if Smith is able to go forward on the insurrection indictment, and I'm hoping any day that might happen, although people say that's a tougher case. Not for me. It's not a tougher case. I'm volunteering yet again for the grand jury and the jury on that case. But if he is convicted on the insurrection, that's foursquare on the 14th Amendment, Section 3, and that would constitutionally prohibit him from running for office or holding office, and that would be a complete showstop. Whether there can be a conviction between now and the election day in 2024, I don't. That's a long shot. Let me add also that would be a very interesting. God, this is from a legal point of view. This is a very interesting possibility. Okay, no conviction on the insurrection indictment coming soon, hopefully, until just before that election. If he were tried and convicted and the conviction stuck after that election, it might be a different case. However, let us not forget that if Trump is elected, he is going to pardon himself. He is going to tell DOJ not to take any further steps, stop the prosecution immediately, and that'd be the end of that. So this is really a race against time.
Chuck, what's your call on this? If you were to put on your futuristic thinking cap and Donald Trump is convicted, would that peel off the numbers? As Jay suggested, the MAGA GOP would peel off. I question that because at this point, I think if you're a MAGA GOP, you drank the Kool-Aid and you're with Jim Jones, aka Donald Trump, all the way. I don't know if they would peel off. What's your thought?
The MAGA GOP devotes its loyalty and allegiance to one group and one group only, and that is the big donors. And they are almost exclusively white male billionaires. Okay, that's going to be their group. They have a common enemy that Trump has lined up against them. An early trial date for the Florida case isn't going to be meaningful because the things that are going to happen before that case actually gets to trial will delay it well into 2024. And even if he were convicted in either of those, the New York or the Florida cases, they'll be appealed. There will be no final convictions. He will be able to enter the presidency if he wins. I don't think he's worried about being able to stall those off long enough to maintain his advantage. But what's interesting about the polls you mentioned is that they include not just people who are lined up Republican committed voters, but Republican leading independents. And that's, I think, where you're seeing the movement and the independent voters generally. So I think Jay is right. What happens between now and the November 2024 election in the criminal cases may very well have enough of an impact on independent voters, including Republican-leaning independent voters, to make a difference in the outcome. We saw that in 2020, we saw that in 2022, not because of criminal indictments, but because of Trump's extremism. And the 2022 election results were more a reflection of reaction against Trump's extremism than any other probable single factor, as far as we can tell. That's my take.
I agree with that, and I would like to add something that wraps around everything we've said. We've made the assumption that these factors in play are straight line, and that they are the only factors, and they will not have dramatic changes as we go forward. But the reality is that changes are the only thing that's constant, and there's going to be changes, I guarantee it. And who knows what will happen in terms of the health of these men, in terms of other upstarts within the political system, what events in Europe and Asia. Gee whiz, I mean, any number of threads could pop out and be headlines and change everything.
Looks like we've run out of time. So I'm tempted to go take a quick left turn here, and I'm going to do it because I got a couple legal beagles here in front of me, and I'd like to get your quick opinion on this. I'm going to take a little road off the subject here, and that is, recall that Spiro T. Agnew was indicted. He said he was going to fight it aggressively, and 11 days later, he accepted a plea bargain. As late as last night, I heard the possibility, or the suggestion that Donald Trump would be wise to take a plea bargain. How could you take a plea bargain on the document case when no sooner you would have the January 6th indictments coming around the corner?
Trump is not going to take a plea. Trump gets his power from doubling down. He gets his power from never agreeing with anybody, not accepting any reasonable result. It's all about power.
You don't think he's running scared right now?
No.
Okay.
If he is, it's not going to affect his moves. And he's a different kettle of fish than Spiro Agnew. Spiro Agnew didn't have nearly the legal sophistication of the understanding of the species, if you will, of the social psychology of the country and the operation of the media. Trump is a past master on all these things, and he knows how to double down. It's in his DNA.
Chuck, any thought on that?
Jay is right on. You would never expect an extreme narcissist like Trump to reverse his position. He didn't even show up for the civil trial. That's how seriously he takes the legal system.
Last thoughts, Jay, with you.
I know this is going to sound boring, gentlemen, but we are at yet another inflection point.
Yes.
And the country is tilting on a razor sharp balance to see whether it will survive as a free society, as a civil society, or not. And things could go terribly, horribly wrong if Trump and his base maintain their position and deny the rule of law and do all their tricks on the election. We could be in deep kimchi over that. And on the other hand, I don't see anybody rising to the occasion on the Democratic side, and I see risks on the Democratic side. So I got my fingers and toes crossed. I'm not confident either way.
Thank you, Jay. Chuck, you get the last word on this topic.
I think Jay's insight is spot on, that we've been looking in the wrong place. If there is going to be a change in direction of this country away from all the things we've been talking about, it's not going to come from the top levels of the political parties or the other. It's going to need to come from solidarity among multiracial, multi-ethnic, multi-socioeconomic, diverse groups that realize that there is only protection in that solidarity dividend of coming together.
What is really interesting about what Chuck just said is this: that the preservation of the country depends on a coalition of diverse parties, because that's our strength and that's our condition, and that's what we want to see happen. But you know what? If you have diversity, it's hard for members of diverse groups to come together and establish a tight coalition.
We saw it in the 1960s.
Over an issue like Vietnam.
Yeah.
And civil rights.
And civil rights.
Well, as Vietnam was destructive, so is Donald Trump. So I can see a cause. All righty. We've run out of time. I'd like to thank my co-host, Jay Fidell, and our special esteemed guest, Chuck Crumpton. Thank you for joining us this week on American Issues Take One. I'm Tim Apicella, your host. And won't you join us next week? And until then, aloha.
Thank you so much for watching Think Tech Hawaii. If you like what we do, please click the like and subscribe button on YouTube. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Check out our website, thinktechhawaii.com. Mahalo.